Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another week of the Wealth Cafe, and you are in store for a wonderful coffee conversation. I am joined today by Melissa, who is a financial consultant, and she walks alongside solopreneurs as they take ownership of their money, enabling them to stop winging it and start creating stability. As for her academic cred, she's an accredited financial counselor. And as for her street cred, she is as a young business owner, she navigated her own personal financial meltdown. We're going to get all into that. All of that is why she loves supporting those who want to get comfy with their financial ecosystem and their business and personal finances. Melissa, I'm so happy to have you here.
I'm so glad to be here. I feel like this conversation is a long time coming for you and I.
Yeah.
So, ta-da, we are
Yeah,
here.
I think it's going to be the first of many. So I'm very excited. I would love, just because it comes up in your bio, tell us about this financial meltdown. We'll start off really going deep here because I think we've all had these moments. So I'd love to hear what yours was if you're open to sharing.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, Small talk, sure, we can have that, but why when you could just
Yeah,
dive right in?
we'll just keep going. We'll just
So,
go into it.
yeah, here we go. So I grew up in a household where money was not an approved conversation, right? Like that was never explicitly said, but it was very clear that we don't talk about money. And so I graduate from high school, I get myself into college. I'm taking out all the student loans there are possible. I went to college in the era of you get a free pizza if you sign up for our credit card.
Yeah.
And I loved pizza along with my friends, right? So it was like all the cards. Um, Buckle was offering 20% off with their first purchase, Victoria's Secret with their first purchase, blah, 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 blah. And so I got myself in quite the amount of debt. And so I graduate and I get my first job. I was a sign language interpreter back then. Still am now, but it's not, it's my side hustle now versus my main gig. But so I got this job that I was in love with. I was working at a school system. There was 13 other interpreters, and it was just kind of this dream job to have getting out of my interpreting program. And then I get my first paycheck and I'm like, oh, okay, that's not. And I get my second and my third. I was like, oh my God, I don't know how I am going to live life off of this tiny, it felt like this teeny tiny paycheck, right? And I have this vivid memory. I'm up in the staff lounge with one of my best friends and I'm just bawling my eyes out. I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know how I'm going to make this work. So I kind of like wipe my tears away. We go back into like the main lounge where all the interpreters are. And one of my colleagues had noticed, like, whoa, she had been crying. Um, and she's like, Melissa, what is going on? And I just like couldn't keep it in. I was like, I don't make enough money. I'm gonna have to quit. Like, what am I supposed to do? And she was brave enough and kind enough to say, maybe it's not the money, but you not knowing how to manage it.
Ooh, yep.
And she could not have been more right. And luckily in that moment I was open to receiving that. I don't know. I mean that's got to be a universe thing because I was open to receiving that and I was like, "Uh okay. Okay. I need to make some changes in what I'm doing." And so that was really like the beginning of that was my turning point because now I started to like research everything I could about personal finances, all the podcasts, all the books, just kind of like getting my hands on everything that I could, all the spreadsheets, right? And I was able to claw myself out of that mountain of debt in about 3 years. And it absolutely changed my trajectory and how I handle personal financial management. And so just that like feeling, I felt so buried. I was like, I don't know how I'm ever going to get myself
Yeah.
out of this to like, okay, I can breathe. I've got a plan. I can figure this shit out. And luckily, I did.
You mentioned too that like you were in a space to receive it, right? Because there are things that we can hear 100 times over. And thankfully in that moment, you were in a place where you're like, okay, wait, how do I do this? How can I? And that changed so much of your story and your trajectory, which is
Mm,
beautiful.
hmm Yeah, I don't even want to think about what have happened if I wasn't open to receiving
Yeah.
that in this moment. But I mean, here I am today as a financial consultant, and I have to imagine that that was supposed to be part of my journey to where I am now because I've got that lived experience of like why is my money controlling me?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
getting to the other side of that.
And that happens so often is our money controls us. We live in that world. You said when you told the story, you were saying, I got this paycheck and it wasn't enough. Like I felt like it wasn't enough and it wasn't going to cover it. And then that ties into our self-worth that we don't feel enough. And it's so full circle in the way we
Hmm
feel about money, see money, our relationship with money. And I'm sure you were going through a lot of that as you were there, like coming out of this cycle of debt and all the things that built up. Was there any emotional or more mental work that you had to do other than just outside of just paying off the cards?
Yeah, so it's funny that you say that because me understanding that there's more to money than just tactics did not hit me until, I don't know, maybe 5 years later. Because
Mm,
when I was in that, like, I've got to get rid of my debt, I've got to change how things are, it was beyond robotic. It was A plus B equals C, spreadsheets follow, don't do anything out of line. And it was so rigid, it completely destroyed my relationship with money.
mm,
Not to say that I had one previous to that, but looking back, I can say that destroyed my relationship with money because it created this like you versus me. It just like put this wall up. And then later, as I started reading the books like The Soul of Money by Lynn Twist and You're a Badass at Making Money by Jen Sincero, those more mindset-y style books where I started to open up and see like there's so much more to money than just this tactical rigid approach. And I am beyond grateful because now that's how I approach it um, in my own life and with my clients. Like we're talking behaviors, we're talking emotions, we're talking tactical, we're talking, there's just so much more to it. And watching some of that kind of unfold, I talk now a lot about we want to create a relationship with money that's like our relationship with our best friend, right? Like we
yeah.
want it to be joyful. We don't want to open our bank accounts and be like, ugh, I hate
Yeah.
it in here, right? Like that's like what it used to be. Like, oh, okay, I'm gonna have to open my bank account. I'm gonna click through the spreadsheet, and that that didn't bring any good vibes
Hmm.
between me and money. So I definitely had a lot of growth to do, kind of after I broke free of that tactical roboticness of that getting out of debt.
I'm also curious from your perspective because I see this in some of my financial planning work is that our relationship with money also changes throughout the seasons of our life.
Mm,
And sometimes you see people like something will happen, right? And as much work as we do, we still get brought back to,
mm,
I talk about like your money story, right? And so you get brought back to the money story and the way that like your parents talked about money and like some instant like moment can happen and we're taken back. Do you see any of these things happening with the clients that you work with and their relationship with money?
yeah, 100%. So whether it's you watched your guardians or your siblings or whomever and the way they handled money, right? So then you kind of like pick up some of that. And then societal stuff, you pick up some of that. And then you've got your own money mistakes. And you're like collecting all of these things all along. And then you're right, where it comes to, okay, now I've got to make a financial decision. And all of these things are like bing, 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 bing in your brain. You're like, wait a second. I've got to sort through all of that to see, well, what is the truth? What
Yeah.
really applies to me in this moment? So then I can make a decision not based on that financial past, but based on what I know to be true now. So yeah, there are some clients that I work with where it's like they think they're, oh yeah, we're just gonna put together a financial system so I can see where my money is. And then you're like, we're going to have to take a little pause. Let's talk through why this emotional thing is happening to you because sometimes it's tears, sometimes it's anger, sometimes it's frustration, sometimes it's guilt, sometimes it's shame. And it's like, look, let's let's pause for a minute on the tactical stuff and let's really talk through what that is because if we're always making decisions from that place of the past,
Hmm.
then history will just continue to repeat itself in the decisions that we make with our money going forward. So, it would be nice if it was just like a quick, simple, like, let me wave my wand. And now all of a sudden, all that financial history that you have is like not gone, but neutral.
Yeah.
Um, but it's just stuff that we have to work through to get to a place where it's like, okay, am I still feeling impacted by that? Yes or no?
And then it takes so much work to then not make a lot of financial decisions from that place of like fear or scarcity. I notice it a lot with people when they are the two big times I see it are making a home purchase, a second
Mhm.
home purchase, like, and you've saved up all this money and now you need to send out that giant wire transfer and they're like, I and like the panic. And I also see it at retirement. When people switch over, people don't realize how hard the transition is and that mindset switch from I'm earning income, I'm making money, I'm accumulating. Oh, okay, we don't have enough money right now. I'll just keep working kind of thing to okay, now whatever you have is essentially what's here, right? Whether it's
Mhm.
your 401k, your IRA, Social Security, you name it, and it's such a mindset shift. And even all those decades later, so much of this comes up for them. And no one spends enough time talking about the mental shift of retirement
Mm.
and these big transition moments.
Mm. Yeah, that's so good. Because, right, when you are in accumulation mode, that feels good to most people.
Yeah.
Like, yes, I'm saving, and now I can look at that number. When you look at that number in your bank account and you see this big number, right, you're like, aha, that feels good. And then when that number either starts to dwindle, such as in retirement, or gets wiped out because you're sending it off to the transfer for the down payment, then that, even though you saved that money for this
Yeah.
specific purpose, it still feels like, huh, wait a minute.
Yep.
Should I be letting go of all that money? Because in our in our minds, large lump sum equals safety.
Hmm.
Some is gone. Am I still safe? Right? So we've got to process through all of that. And yeah, I don't know if that just means folks like us making sure we have more of those conversations when we think about we're saving money, but we're saving it for a purpose. And now let's visualize what it looks like to be able to use it for that purpose. And that's the moment that brings joy instead of scarcity fear, right? But like I get to use it, and that's the moment that brings joy. I don't know. Did I just talk in a circle there?
No, it was beautiful. I loved it. And I'm totally with you, right? And you and I could probably geek out on this all day, but there is so much emotion to money, and I'd love to ironically transition into talking about more of these transitions, right? And
Mhm.
how we navigate, and I know this is something you work with clients on a lot, is handling transitions and different seasons in life and what that looks like financially. So I'd love to hear from you. How do we prepare in your expertise for these different transitions and these different seasons that we have?
Yeah. So, first and foremost, the preparation period varies, obviously, depending on what kind of transition we're looking at. But you and I, prior to hopping on and pressing record, we were talking through the importance of setting the plan, making the decisions before you actually hit that transition moment, because that transition moment is filled with its own emotions, high energy, charge, and to have to make financial decisions in the midst of the actual transition, that's a very difficult task to put on someone. Um, to just elaborate a little bit, recently my uncle passed, and the heightened emotions of everything that came with that. I had this moment, knowing that you and I were going to be talking,
Mhm.
I had this moment of if I had to make a financial decision right now, I would not be doing so with a clear mind.
Mm.
I would not. I would not be doing so with a clear mind. So that is applicable to any type of transition we're making, whether that's coming out of the workforce to starting your own business or leaving starting your own business and going into the workforce, whether that's retirement, whether that, I mean, whatever the transition is, having that prep period, talking through, okay, what steps do I need to take? What do I need to consider? But having that outlined, because like even if you can't officially make that step, at least knowing what step it is to take is right there in front of you. So then you can just like check a box versus like now I've got to make a decision about
Yeah.
this, you know? It's like at least I have the plan in front of me and I know what the next step is instead of having to really like exhaust mental energy to come up with that in the midst of the transition.
Yeah, and I appreciate you, number one, sharing and being here after losing your uncle and just sharing what you went through and this honest experience. And it to me is also the important reminder of working with somebody like a financial planner, like a financial coach who can help, and estate attorneys and accountants, like your whole financial team, right? Who can
Mhm.
also help guide you through these moments because you never know how long your grieving period could be, your transition period could be, right? We all have different experiences, different lives, different trajectories, all of it. And so it could take a day, it could take a year. I've seen people grieve and go through transition processes for 10 years. And so to
Mhm.
have the plan, to begin with, and then also to have the right people around you to help you execute on it, it's like you rarely go to the doctor. You do that once a year doctor visit when you're healthy. You go to the doctor more often than not when you're sick and something's wrong. And you go for that
Mhm.
checkup because you go to the expert to help you. And that's
Mhm.
a similar situation here.
Yeah. Yeah. And you bring up a great point. When you're putting together that plan, figuring out who are the right financial professionals to bring
Mhm.
in those moments. As you know, there's so many different financial professionals that apply to various situations. And I don't know if this happens to you, but I'll have people who come to me and they're like, "Hey, could you take care of my books?" And I was like, "I'm not a bookkeeper, but
Yeah.
I'd love to introduce you to someone who is, you know?" And so it is confusing on
Mhm.
like who does what and what title means what and all of that. So I think for you bringing up the fact that like, Yes, bring in your team, but figure out who that team will be.
Yeah. And
Figure out who
figure it
that team
out
will be.
sooner rather
Yes.
than later. You and I had also had the conversation of making the plan ahead of time and like well before you need it. Especially that comes into like estate planning, that comes into, people want to, I have so many people that will come to me and they'll talk about retirement after they've retired. And I'm like, well, where have you been the last 10, 20 years when we could have been having this conversation? And a lot of it, and I love your opinion and what you've seen in your experience on this as well, is a lot of it's fear, right? So many of the people I see, and myself included sometimes, right? Like we are so afraid to make the wrong choice that we often don't make a choice and we lose that time.
Yes. Yes. Especially with money as charged as it is, that analysis paralysis
Mhm.
often happens. Um, my clients will describe it either like they're putting their head in their sand or they're hiding under their desk about it or whatever, it's like it's easier to pretend that I don't have to face it than to like really be like, okay, I'm ready to face it. And that's why like you and I do what I do. It's like we don't want you to have to face money alone. We don't want you to have to stare at whatever it is that's bringing fear. And that can be everything from a credit card bill that you don't want to look at to, okay, my retirement isn't to where I want it to be, right? Like whatever it is, we don't want you to have to feel like I'm so alone when I'm in this process because that is when fear can take hold.
And that's when we make decisions out of like a scarcity mindset, like going back to those emotions as well. That's when I find that people they default to those old emotions, they start running on a hamster wheel, and then they either do nothing or they do something rash, right? It's like never make a decision when you're upset, angry, all those things.
Yeah.
And that's when people do it.
Yeah, for sure. Because they get to a point where it's like now or never. And then like, okay, now. Um, and then the decision isn't oftentimes isn't one that's going to set them up in the best way
Yeah.
possible because it just was like a I had to do something um to get off the hamster wheel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you so much for being here today. This was such an incredible conversation. Like I said, I just think it's the first of many. You and I could probably be here for the next 10 hours recording and talking about everything under the sun. So I will also drop it that if anybody has any things that Melissa and I should cover in the future, if you want to see any other conversations for us to have, please feel free to drop it in the comments. Send me or Melissa a DM on Instagram, and she will share her info with us shortly. But before we do that, I have one final question that I like to ask everyone.
Yeah.
And that is, what is one thing you do every day that makes you feel wealthy?
I stole this from the book Happy Money by Ken Honda. I thank my money. Arigato
Oh,
in, arigato out. And when he interviews all of these super rich people, I think millionaires, billionaires, and he's like, I boiled it down to we can't just be grateful when money comes in, but we've got to be grateful when we're spending our
mhm.
money too. So I don't I don't just get excited when an invoice gets paid, but and not to say like, oh, I get so excited when I pay my Verizon bill. However, my point is I still say thank you for allowing me to have this phone that runs my business. It keeps me connected to the people that I love. I'm so grateful to have that money to make that payment.
That is beautiful. And I have not read that book, so I'm mentally adding that to my list and probably to my Amazon cart next because I always love a good book recommendation that comes with it. So thank you so much for that. And that was beautiful. And thank you again for being here. If people have any questions for you, they want to connect with you, learn more about your work, where is the best place to find you?
So my website, melissamitt.com, is kind of a central hub for anything, but I am active on Instagram and threads underscore Melissa Mitt.
Perfect. And we will link all of that here in the show notes. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in to this episode of the Wealth Cafe. And I look forward to seeing you all next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks for having me, Caroline.